Hello, and welcome back to the Anima Leadership Cafe. Each session, we explore insights and strategies that allow us to tap into our personal wisdom and collective strengths. So, if you're looking to build healthier, more equitable, and interdependent relationships with yourself, your team, and your organization, you're in the right place. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you're the first to see when a new video is released.
Hello, everybody. My name is Shakil. My pronouns are he and him. I'm co-founder of Anima Leadership and so delighted you could join us today for this really important and exciting, as Rebecca said, Anima Cafe. And we're going to be sharing some data that we've been collecting over the last couple of years from organizations and giving you a synthesis of some of the data and particularly how it relates to factors connected to psychological safety. All right. So let's begin. First of all, I want to start by talking about what is psychological safety and also what it's not. And if you've attended any of our sessions before, you've probably heard me say this, but for those who are new, I'm going to start here. So, psychological safety is absolutely essential. It is defined as the ability for workplace teams, employees, to raise concerns and questions, to challenge ideas, as well as to admit to mistakes, and to do that without fear of humiliation or retaliation by supervisors or peers. Okay, that's really, really important. A lot of this is rooted in the work of Amy Edmondson, and she wrote the Fearless Organization, and she's really sort of set the benchmark for what this work means. Now, from her research, we know that psychological safety is the number one factor for high performing teams. Okay, and it's because in conditions of psychological safety, people are willing to take more risks. They're willing to challenge each other. They're willing to challenge the way things are done. They're willing to work through conflict. And as a result, that's where the innovation comes from. And so uh, we see that in high performance. Of course, when it comes to the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI work, you can't have the conditions for inclusion and belonging without psychological safety. So, really important. Now, that's what psychological safety is. But what I want to also share is what it's not. Okay. So, what it's not the same thing as safe space. Safe space is a concept that really comes to from vulnerable groups that are seeking refuge from violence and abuse. Okay, so think about a women's shelter. That's a safe space. Okay, when we're talking about safe spaces, those are deeply therapeutic concepts. Okay, now a workplace is not a therapeutic space. The idea that we should have um, safe spaces in the workplace has just been a complete mishmash of ideas appropriated from very different contexts and brought over into the workplace. There's a whole other conversation we can have about that, about how that's happened, but all to say that it's been a bit of a mess. So we need to disentangle these things because, as I said, workplaces are not therapeutic places. So we should strive for psychological safety. We should not be striving for safe space. Okay. And we need psychological safety because that's critical for all kinds of things related to DEI, related to conflict, related to innovation, and so many other things we're going to talk about today. So I just want to set the stage that what psychological safety is and what it is not. Now, let's start with this. So a question for leaders in any position, whether you're a manager, whether you're executive, you should be asking, what important information might employees know but they're not telling us. That's really, really critical. And why this is important is that a lot of organizations measure engagement, but few measure whether employees actually feel safe to raise their voice, to share their concerns, or be vulnerable. So psychological safety and trust are critical. So I love how you started this things off for us, Rebecca, by connecting land acknowledgments to a way of being. And trust is foundational to a way of being if we want to be authentic, as well as we want to be productive in workplaces. So here's what our study covers. We have a sample of about 850 employees from 7 different organizations across Canada and the US. We looked at 6 workplace indicators related to psychological safety. And we also cross-tabbed some of these results by race, gender, disability, and sexual orientation. Now, we're not done. You're just getting to see the early returns. There's more analysis we're going to do. We're going to share our first part of what we're learning from this data. Okay? So, there were 6 questions we asked. The first was, how well do leaders create a welcoming and inclusive environment? How much confidence do you have that your manager can handle harassment, discrimination if it happens? We asked if the workplace that employees are in is actually free of harassment, discrimination. We asked about employees' comfort with asking for accommodations if accommodations was needed. And critically, we asked about whether people could speak up without fear of retaliation. First, by their colleagues. And second, could they speak up? And even more importantly, can they speak up without fear of retaliation by their leaders? So, the 6 different measures, I'm going to share with you just the average scores, and we're going to go into the data in a bit. Okay. So what we found was that generally for the 7 organizations we were dealing with, and these are across sectors, this includes the legal sector, this includes public public sector, this includes not-for-profits, it also includes private multinational company as well. Okay, so what we found was that the overall scores were the overall scores on average, 72% of the respondents felt that their leadership did create an inclusive and welcoming environment. 71% felt confident in their managers that they could handle harassment discrimination. 70% felt that their workplace was free of harassment discrimination. Okay. And 65% felt confident that if they needed an accommodation, they would ask for it. 66% said they felt comfortable if they had concerns and could speak up to their colleagues. But only 49% said that they felt comfortable speaking up to their leaders. So what we see through these 6 different questions is actually these questions go from low risk and low vulnerability through to the highest levels of risk and vulnerability when it comes to sharing something that might not be popular, saying something to my manager or leader. So let's go into this in a little bit more detail. Okay. Overall, we saw strong trust and inclusion scores. All right. And why that's important is that if like we don't have direct comparable data that's out there that we can compare it to, so we have to go to something adjacent. So for example, employee engagement data. Um, when you take a look at Gallup, which is the organization that does the most amount of work around employee engagement, their highest performers, the ones that win awards every year, on average, what we're talking about is workplaces that are on average about 70% engaged. And so that's your highest level of performers. In Canada, the US, Average organizations are like 20 to 30% of the employees are engaged, quite low. Okay, so what we're seeing is based on that 70%, we can see that uh, our 70% numbers also align with leaders creating a welcoming, inclusive environment. So we could say that there's strong trust and inclusion scores. Okay. Now, what we also found is that there are weak scores when it comes to employee voice, and the largest gaps are due to disability and organizational level, meaning where you are in the organization. Okay, so let's get into that because those are the big things. So I'm going to introduce something that we call the trust architecture. Okay, so the trust architecture is composed of three things. A, um, do leaders care? So trust in intentions. Two, trust in systems, meaning will the organization support me when I need it? And the third is trust in voice. Can I tell the truth when it matters? So, and what we find as we go through this is that this is extremely critical in our data. Culture really succeed when all three are present. Intentions, voice, trust in intentions, trust in systems, and trust in voice. And as I said, there's progressively greater employee risk and vulnerability when we go from intentions. Yeah, I get it. My leaders, yeah, they're creating a welcoming environment. That's a low risk thing to say. Okay. The second thing is the systems. It's like, okay, well, if I need it, will the system support me? If I ask for accommodations, will they will the system support me? Okay. And then voice. Well, can I tell the truth when something not so great is happening? So each of these is higher levels of risk, which I think intuitively makes sense to folks. Now, here's what we know from our data is that there is a significant voice gap. Speaking up to colleagues, on average, the scores came to 66%. Speaking up to leaders, 49%. That's a voice gap of 17 points. And it's something that most of us probably know intuitively from working inside organizations. But here's some of the first data that we've come across that indicates this. So the voice gap is something we're going to be talking about. Now, why the voice gap matters, because if employees can't tell us what's happening, that limits our innovation. It limits risk detection. There's ethical concerns that might not get noticed. It also affects employee retention because if I can't be my whole self, I can't tell the truth here. I got to constantly hide. I'm often looking for the door out. So employee retention is tied to this, as well as just organizational learning and many other things that I'm sure you could add. So being able to speak up to my colleagues, more importantly, to be able to speak up to my supervisors is absolutely essential. And that's part of what we also called organizational candor, because 72% say leaders are inclusive, but only 49% feel comfortable disagreeing with them. All right. So that is how candid we can be in our organization. So inclusion is how do I belong? Do I belong? Trust is will I be treated fairly? Organizational candor is can I tell the truth? And the voice gap is how candid can I be when hierarchy enters the room, when my bosses enter the room? So the voice gap is a practical measure of organizational candor. Okay. And organizational candor, as we said, is critical to so many elements of performance. Now, this also may not be that surprising to a lot of people, but we have seen over and over again that the higher up we go in leadership, the different the organizational feels for us. Okay. And now a lot of us know this intuitively. There's a lot of research that's out there that indicates that. Well, our research also indicates that because what we found is that when it comes to um, when it comes to uh, inclusion, here's what it looks like. Executives rated the average score for executives on the agree disagree format where um, was 94%. So executives really felt like leaders are welcoming and inclusive. Managers, 74%, 20-point drop there. Employees, 70%. So you can see this shift where how I perceive the organization when I'm at the top and when I'm at the bottom is considerably different. 24-point gap. Um, Executives, 83% think that it's safe to speak up to leaders. Managers, it's 56%. Employees, it's 46%. Okay, so we see this very, very large gap inside organizations. Now, again, 850 employees, 7 different organizations. Uh, just important to note. Now, what we're saying is that people with the most power experience the culture of their organization very differently. And on most measures, leaders just respond more positively than employees. And why not? That's their perspective. That's their experience. They have more leverage. They have more power. So they're having a very different experience. So the message to leaders is, regardless of what you think the organization is like, whether it's small or big, it behooves you to recognize that you've only got a very small and slightly distorted version of the organization. Frontline employees have a very different opinion of the organization. Okay. And there will almost always be a gap. And that's, for me, that's a aspect of leadership humility and leadership courage to name that, to accept that, and then to work to shift it. Now, let's talk about disability because this is an extremely important thing that came out through our research. Quite stunning. The most consistent signal that we got was folks with disabilities struggling and having a very different experience with the organization um, than anybody else. Okay. Um, across, it was the most consistent gap across 5 of the 6 questions for is the workplace inclusive and welcoming? 60% compared to 72%. Confidence in leadership to deal with harassment and discrimination, 58% compared to 71% overall. Accommodations, safety, can I ask for accommodations? 50% compared to 65% overall. Harassment-free workplace, discrimination-free workplace, 57% compared to 70% overall. Speaking up to leaders, 31% compared to 49% overall. This is phenomenally important. What we're also seeing is that people most likely need accommodations are least comfortable requesting them. Overall, the average is 65%, but with folks with disability, it's 50%. Those with no disability actually are higher than the average at 67%. Folks who identify as trans, non-binary, 44% compared to an overall 65%. And as a comparison, women, 62%, men, 73% overall. Okay, so again, folks who need it the most, least likely to, least comfortable requesting this. So important for us to know. Folks that identify as LGBTQ2S plus, 58%, compared to 66% who are heterosexual and the overall 65. Okay. So again, safety. Can I even request it if I need it? Well, there's all kinds of stories and dynamics as to why we can't. Racial minorities, we put this in as well because overall, racial minorities are about the same as the average compared to white folks, also around the average. And why this is important is that we found that disability was actually a more dominant marker than race or gender. Okay, that's not to say that race and gender aren't important. There were definitely gaps. White people felt more confident overall in the organization. Um, um, Men felt more confident than women, but overall, the biggest gaps were around disability. I don't know if that came as a surprise to you. Certainly was a wake-up call for us. Um, okay, so Uh, again, harassment, discrimination, similar kind of thing that we're seeing is that 70% overall positive, that folks feel comfortable. 70% say that, they work in a context that's harassment, discrimination free, but significant differences for minoritized folks. Okay, here we go. Trans non-binary, that number's at 43. Folks with disabilities, 57. LGBTQ2S plus 58%. Racial minorities, 65%. Women, 70%. So again, women staying feeling closer to the norm. What surprised us most was that race and gender, as I said, were smaller than expected, and hierarchy, where we are in the organization, and disability were the two big things that had huge impacts when it came to psychological safety. Okay, so high performing organizations, one, they're working at reducing fear. That's the psychological safety piece. They're working to increase candor. They're normalizing disagreement because that's how humans work. And they also reward truth telling. Okay, so these are the things we want to be striving towards. So the questions executives, leaders should be asking, what are employees not telling us? Who experiences our culture differently? And how do we know? So this is why it's so important to collect data. Okay. So if you're an organization thinking about what you need to measure next, one, measure the voice gap, the difference between how comfortable people feel speaking up in front of their colleagues versus how much they feel comfortable speaking up to their leaders. Two, really looking at accommodation and looking at the numbers around who feels comfortable asking for accommodations. This is where we're seeing um, huge impacts for minoritized groups. Okay, really, really important. Three, disability experience. This is shifting me a lot because disability experience, it's the thing that when we conduct audits inside organizations, we hear that experience a lot. This is the first time we're actually looking at quantitative data that's really separating out, the wheat from the chaff. And this is really important because in many ways, the experience of your most vulnerable really becomes your benchmark for how well you're doing regarding inclusion, regarding equity, regarding um, a sense of belonging. So we don't have the crosstabs yet. We're going to be doing that as the next stage. We want to be looking at the experience of how intersectional nature of disability and race and gender and all these things come together. We don't have that data yet. We are going to be doing that analysis. No, let me restate. We have the data. We haven't done the analysis. We are doing that as the next year, as the early preview. Okay. And the last thing we'd say is measure the employee perception gap. Okay. That really important because we know the hierarchy makes a difference. And so the experience of leaders in the organization is one set of data. The experience of employees is another set of data, and we need to find how these things align and where they diverge. Okay. So overall, the final insights are that employees generally trust leaders overall from this data set that we've got. Again, 850 people, 7 different organizations from Canada and the US. Um, while employees generally trust leaders, many still hesitate to challenge them. So, this idea of the trust architecture, we're starting to believe that the next frontier for inclusion is not just belonging, it's actually trust. And I think that's something that we need to start measuring and working on.
Hi, Shakil. Hi, everybody. I just really appreciated, um, I used to be a therapist for many years, and trust is a huge piece. You can't do anything without trust. You have to trust that you're going to go to the grocery store, you'll give money, you'll get a product, and you have to trust your landlord is not, going to be there has to be some level of trust, even though cognitive, we don't feel that often, especially when there's a lot of power involved with particularly management or leadership. So I really thought the reward truth telling, especially when you connect them with the seven grandfather teachings, really important to think about how do we foster environments of honesty and how do we reward truth telling, which I love that phrase. So that was one reflection. Thank you for the presentation so far.
Wonderful. Thanks, Deb. Appreciate you jumping in. And I see you, and then Jill, and then Cheryl.
Thanks, Shakil. It's really awesome to see these data take shape. Um, the the piece around, so one was a quick question: what kind of response rates? Is this a small slice of the people you were working with, or was it a fairly big slice of those you were working with? The other piece is around trust. There, I teach in social work, and there is this idealized piece that, you know, trust is something that happens organically between people, and if we work together, have a trusting environment. And the way I teach it and what I try to demonstrate is trust will happen when you become trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have operationalized what does trustworthiness mean, but the idea is that, it's not just leaders responding to what people tell them. There's a lot in their control about how to demonstrate trustworthiness, how to be reliable, how to do what you say you're going to do, how to um, take risks, being in a reciprocal relationship, that you're asking them to take risks with you, you have to take risks with them. So this idea that it's just an organic kind of piece can get broken down more than that. And so I look forward to seeing how in day 2, how you operationalize those pieces in the summer piece. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. Appreciate that. Great. Jill, go ahead. Oh, by the way, Anne, I don't have the numbers for you for um, response rates because we used an instrument, and the instrument was used differently in different organizations. For some organizations, they went for and exceeded like 2/3 of their employees, and others they took a sampling, and they were like, "We got 30,000 employees. We want to talk to, this section of the organization." So we can't really compare apples to apples in this one, but overall, we're just saying what's our response. I do have something else I may share with you in a bit at the end around some of the stuff that we know around representation. We'll come back to that.
Sorry, and Shakil, just to confirm then, somebody asked, was the data collected through Anima employee engagement audits or with other instruments? And the answer would be it would have been all of our in-house instruments.
Yeah, these are in-house instruments that we've developed, and this particular tool is our what's known as the Deep Diversity Organizational Audit instrument, and it consists of um, 42 questions related to everything in the employee life cycle, recruitment, retention, advancement, and so on, as well as these 6 questions on employee experience and psychological safety. So we've extracted that. Um, and it also includes 14 demographic questions on top of the 42. So it's 56 question instrument. So with that, we're just starting to harvest the data from the last couple of years. All right, Jill, go ahead, and then Cheryl.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so fascinated by what you're reporting here. And for me, talking about the various gaps that exist, I was at an event recently where the gap between what leadership was perceiving was happening or how people were feeling and what employees were experiencing was so vast that it was actually disorienting. And I'm wondering about the connection between the gap and trust, like as you start to operationalize that, because to me, trust is deteriorated when there's that much of a difference between what you think is happening and what is really happening, because that starts to turn into gaslighting, right? Where you're saying, this is who we are, this is who we be, this is how we be. And people are like, that ain't true. That's not how we're living the reality. And speaking up in that context is not only saying this is my reality, but it's saying you are lying.
Yes.
Like you are, that and trust cannot exist when there's that much of a gap. Anyway, just so fascinated by what you're reporting. Can't wait to see what your next results are.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. It's so true. So many organizations are like that, which is even why when we just measure engagement scores, they average like 20 to 30% of the workforces in Canada and the US are engaged, which means, why are 70 to 80% not engaged? We're not even asking questions as as specific around power, because that's not really employee engagement, doesn't talk about power, whereas ours do. So even in the non-power related surveys, when engagement is so low, you've got to know that so many organizations and organizational leaders are not tracking their own perceptions, not tracking the realities of what's happening for people on the ground. And they're making decisions that are often thoughtless, unkind, and sometimes cruel. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Thanks, Shakil. Fascinating data. Like one of the, and thank you for doing the work. This takes a lot of, organizing and thinking and all the analysis. And I'm just trying to think about how to make sure that it lands in the best context, right? And so what is the context you put around it? And it would be wonderful to add to canvas from this group and others what other factors would be important to contextualize so that people can really see the data and the context within which it was collected and analyzed. So I think about, for example, I am really surprised to see that the difference for racialized people is not as significant. And that is an outlier for me. And so immediately I think, well, what is the percentage of racialized people in that respondent group?
Yeah.
Right? And what is the percentage of racialized people who responded to the survey compared to the percentage, the numbers of racialized people within that organization? That in and of itself tells you something, right? Because a lot of racialized people will not respond to surveys because they believe nothing will be done from the data that they provide. And so to understand that, like if it was a 90% sample, of racialized people, then you can say, yeah, this is representative. But if 20% of racialized people responded, that's a whole other data point in your analysis.
Yeah.
And so I think that is really important. I think it's the intersectionality really important, and I know you said you're going to work on that. That's really important. It's also important to talk about the sizes of these organizations, the sectors that they belong to, Because if people, I mean, what do we want from this, right? We want for people to be able to use this, like to have like solutions from this data to understand, okay, yeah, this is what we're seeing. This is my sector. This is what likely might be happening here. And so if we give that additional context, I think that this will be, much more valuable.
Quick response. We know that of the respondents, 25% would identify as racialized, and a very, very small percentage, under 1%, would have been indigenous. So what this is that this isn't data that you can compare with like national stats, because that's not what this is. What it is it's a sample of 7 organizations who are willing to look at these areas. So already these are um, organizations that have a different kind of investment
Yeah,
because
fair
they're
enough.
willing to collect the data in the first place to see how they're doing, right?
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
And so I guess my question is that, like if this is what the committed are getting, then just imagine the lower responses and the worst and the bigger gaps that we would see with more mainstream organizations, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of race, of course, I mean, I've studied race. That's everything that I do. I was surprised by this too, but we haven't also gotten away from like we're going to do the other analysis. We're going to look at how what's the response rates uh, of racialized leaders. How did they respond compared to the norm? So we're going to do all that sort of analysis to see both how race and gender, sexual orientation, disability will play out, because of course that's so important. At just this first analysis, the big things were power, hierarchy inside the organization, um, that had a very different thing, and disability. Those were the first things that jumped off the page. And so we'll do deeper analysis and get back to you with all that. And we love your comments. If there's any other comments you feel like other context specific things, please put them into chat, because we're going to harvest this. This is a dialogue. It's so important, the things you're telling us, because we want to be able to turn this into useful, tangible things rather than something that someone goes, well, they missed this and dismiss it, right? Really important. Thank you. Waiza.
Yeah, thanks. The people who are working in the DEI space, would we be sort of influenced by maybe the larger kind of political direction or whatever we're kind of seeing to move DEI work in a different direction than what it's been? Is that a risk, I guess?
Oh, it's not just a risk, it's happening.
Mhm. Okay.
Right? Like it's happening everywhere. People have stopped using, you don't hear racial justice as much anymore. You
Yeah.
barely aren't even hearing DEI. So that shift is already happening. Now, here's the thing that I would say, as someone that's been involved for like 30 years, a lot of us have been doing this work because the holes have been in our organizations since before there was language as
Hmm.
as tidy as DEI to help explain these things. So I would say we're going through an iteration, and strategically organizations are going to do different things, and I think that the work itself will continue. It is continuing. It's
Right.
just that it's going to continue under under different titles. To me personally, I want the work to continue.
Yeah.
What labels we put on it, like, look, our work is to be also strategic and responsive. And
Hmm.
just like always, the vast majority of leaders are resistant to this work, right? They don't understand it. They don't want to understand it. There's lots of, and there's just also some bad actors involved, right?
Hmm.
But we do the work anyway. And we've done it under all kinds of banners, from like cultural competence, diversity, anti-racism. There's all these anti-oppression. There's all these different handles that it goes under. I think we're just at a point where we're having to respond to the context. And, you know, different people in different organizations will give you more latitude and others will be less. And so I think it behooves us just to be adaptive to work
For
with.
sure.
We need to work to continue the work because ultimately, um, my eye isn't on the labels.
Hmm.
My eye is on um, the minoritized people that are struggling inside their organization. What are we doing to make that better? What are the small ways? What are the big ways? And especially in a climate where we got way less wiggle room now. But to me, it's like, who are we focused on? What are we focused on? And if we can keep our eyes on the employees that are struggling, not because of any fault of their own, but because of their
Hmm.
identities and the systemic nature, that's what that we keep our eye on that. I'm less concerned about the labels of what it's done under, but to keep pushing it to be strategic. This is a bit more adjacent to the
Hmm.
conversation we're in right now. I appreciate the comment, but I'm
Yeah.
just gonna say that's a starting point. I'm gonna move us on, but thank you for
Yeah.
the
Thanks.
question and comment. Jillian,
Can you hear me?
yes, I can.
Hi, I'll just say that I'm based in Canada, so I'm not experiencing what's happening on the US side of the border. So I just want to acknowledge that with my comment. Um, and that's related to neurodiversity that is recognized as disabilities in Canada and the intersectionality of that with race. And minorities, but also just for white folks as well. And sometimes a lack of appreciation of the accommodations that are needed for people who are neurodiverse. It's a big umbrella, but how to create spaces where those people can thrive. And we've recently learned about a, a relation of a young relation of a colleague who asked for accommodations in the workplace and then was pulled into HR and fired.
Wow.
Um, and all they'd asked for was a quiet workspace. So I am very curious to know about breaking those numbers out because I think we've all gotten used to when somebody has a physical disability, you can see something, and it's very easy to say you need wheelchair accessibility, or you need dragon speaking, or you need visual impairment, like all those tools. But when it's able to be yourself with the way your brain works, or it could be another invisible disability. I think there's a my experience recently is there's a lot less understanding, nor an understanding of the accommodations that are needed. And therefore, people don't are also scared to ask for accommodations because they don't want to declare their invisible disability because they're just learning to manage in the world.
Right.
And it's a very vulnerable thing to disclose. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to throw that in there. But
Yeah.
I don't want the US is in a different space right now. So I acknowledge that.
Thanks, Jillian. Appreciate that. And it's very true. And also, interestingly, whenever we've done conducted surveys, we all also see a bit of a discrepancy because one of our questions is always do you identify as someone with a disability? And there's options that people can fill in. And then we always have follow-up questions that says, you know, do any of these conditions apply to you? And then we list off a number of them. And we always see an interesting thing that there's a number of people who will check off neurodiversity boxes, won't necessarily check off the disability box. And so we see that quite regularly. And vice versa. There's people with once they check off something, says, well, that would probably fall under even a traditional disability, but people themselves don't consider themselves disabled. So there's all these kind of discrepancies. We haven't broken it down yet, but it's definitely one of the areas we're looking at because the questions around neurodiversity were built in to the survey as well.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Great. Rebecca, I know we're about to wrap up.
Yeah, I just have one closing question, just pulling from some of the things folks have asked. Somebody asked earlier, what would the possible next steps be, with this data? But I was hoping you could potentially answer that, a bit more specifically within folks' teams or workplaces, and also speak to what some of the other data guardrails there might be when you're going into next steps. So say you collect this data in your workplace, that's really fantastic. Do you do listening sessions or focus groups? What are the processes put in place to help capture voice or
Right.
employee?
So this is what we've got is um, quantitative data. This is the numbers. The numbers don't tell us the stories. And so whenever you've got quantitative data like this, we always recommend, when numbers are low, go talk to your people, do the listening sessions. If there's trust that feels low, get third parties to come in and run focus groups so that it can feel more confidential. But again, it really depends on the organization. If it's a low trust context, you're going to get either people not showing up to those listening sessions, or or they're just going to put on the happy face, go, no, everything's just fine, right? And both of those things speak to trust and speak to candor and speak to psychological safety. And when those things aren't present, it's harder to get. And so it takes more work and more steps to try to extract that. But fundamentally, it comes down to actions. What are you doing? What are you communicating? What are you modeling? Appreciate your comments. We will definitely be using those to help us think through the next steps. And I'd invite you at this stage to please come off mute and thank each other and say goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
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 Thank you so much.